the United States stands with Israel.
Well, we are starting this broadcast with a developing story from West Asia, where Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant says Hamas has launched a war against the State of Israel.
It's easy to tell you a flat story. It's easy to show you what's happening around the world. We do the difficult part.
This weapon has been banned, but the US, Ukraine and Russia do not find the bombs problematic.
We also tell you why what's happening.
New drug is making a difference in the fight against Alzheimer's. This medicine helps slow down a patient's cognitive decline.
We look beyond the text.
Welcome back, viewers. You're watching WION World is One. This is World DNA, the show that gets you ahead of everyone else. I'm Shibun Channa.
And I'm Raisha Sehgal. On World DNA today, amid the ongoing war in Gaza, White House is concerned over reports of white phosphorus used by the Israeli military in Lebanon attack. Meanwhile, the United Nations has warned of starvation and epidemic diseases in Gaza amid intense bombing. We'll be tracking all of that, the dire situation in Gaza, on the show today.
While that remains our top focus, also on the show today, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is in the United States in a last-ditch plea for US aid before it runs out this year. Now, the Republicans argue that the US should no longer provide open-ended backing to Ukraine's battle against Russia. We will be tracking all of that on a World DNA right here, right now. Let's get you started with the headlines.
Israeli Defense Minister rallies against global calls for a ceasefire, says Israel's operation to wipe out Hamas will take time, but adds that they do not intend on staying in Gaza permanently.
US expresses concerns over reports of Israel using Washington-supplied white phosphorus in Lebanon. Says there is legitimate military use for white phosphorus, but that does not include using them on civilians.
US FBI Chief Christopher Wray calls on the Chief of India's CBI. The two discuss enhanced coordination between two agencies over transnational crimes.
US Supreme Court says it will consider Special Counsel Jack Smith's request to rule quickly on whether presidential immunity protects former President Trump from prosecution in 2020 election interference case.
And Indian wicketkeeper Rishabh Pant is set to make his return to cricket in 2024. The 26-year-old will participate in the Indian Premier League 1 year after suffering a near-fatal accident.
That has changed the day for India.
Our top focus on World DNA this morning. Flares and explosions lit up the sky over Gaza as the Israeli forces continued their bombing of the Gaza Strip.
After the collapse of a week-long ceasefire on the 1st of December, Tel Aviv began a ground offensive in southern Gaza, which started last week. Now, Israel has since pushed from the east into the heart of the city of Khan Younis, with warplanes attacking an area to the west.
Well, the Israeli airstrikes poured down on Gaza's largest southern city. We're talking about Khan Younis overnight. And deadly clashes and bombing shook central and northern urban areas. The Israeli police on Monday reported multiple impact sites of rocket fragments in Holon, on the edge of Tel Aviv. They said that one civilian was likely wounded. A video released by the Israeli army claimed to show weapons inside a mosque in Jabalia, northern Gaza.
The White House expressed concern over reports that Israel used US-supplied white phosphorus in attacks on Lebanon, adding that it was seeking more details on the same. Lebanon has accused Israel of repeatedly using the incendiary weapon in October. The Washington Post said analysis of shell fragments from one attack showed that the rounds were US-made.
Separately, Israel's military said it was striking the source of munitions fired from Lebanon. Well, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, a war monitor, said that the Israeli strikes late Sunday near Damascus killed 2 Hezbollah fighters and 2 Syrians working with the group. On Monday, a local official in South Lebanon was killed by an Israeli shell. Well, the IDF said that 104 soldiers had been killed and 582 wounded in its Gaza ground offensive, which began on October 27th.
Defense Minister of Israel said that Israel had no intention of staying permanently in the Gaza Strip. Yoav Gallant stated that Israel was open to discussing alternatives about who would control the territory, as long as it was not a group hostile to Tel Aviv.
He said that Israel was open to possibly reaching an agreement with Hezbollah on condition that any agreement included a safe zone along the border and proper guarantees.
Palestinians across the West Bank and East Jerusalem staged a general strike on Monday. Shops, schools and government offices all were shut in solidarity with Gazans. In Lebanon, public institutions, banks, schools and universities were also closed. And a stoppage was observed in Istanbul's Yesenyurt district. Many businesses in the area are owned by Palestinians, as well as people from Syria, Yemen and Iran.
Well, Israel said that more aid will enter Gaza as it announced 2 additional checkpoints for examining relief supplies, that is before dispatching them through the Rafah gateway. Well, no new direct crossing will be opened, but the Nitzana and Kerem Shalom crossings will be used to carry out checks before sending the trucks through the Rafah border.
The UN General Assembly is set to meet to discuss the humanitarian crisis in Gaza after the US last week vetoed a Security Council resolution for a ceasefire. Diplomatic sources say another ceasefire resolution could be proposed, though General Assembly resolutions are non-binding.
Well, on Monday, UN Security Council ambassadors travelled to Egypt to meet the Gazan victims of the war in an informal one-day trip organised by Abu Dhabi and Egypt.
The European Union's top diplomat said the situation in Gaza is catastrophic and apocalyptic. We're talking about Josep Borrell, who said the destruction is proportionally even greater than what Germany experienced in World War II.
And for more on this, we're now being joined by Irina Tsuskaman from Washington, D.C. Ms. Irina is a human rights and national security lawyer based in the U.S. She is also a geopolitical analyst. Thank you so much for joining us in WION.
Thank you for the invitation.
Right. Now, ma'am, the humanitarian cost of the ongoing war in Gaza is paramount at the moment. Hospitals in Gaza are struggling with a number of casualties and medical supplies. The UN's Palestinian Refugee Agency says that there's almost a total breakdown of civil order. The aid trucks are being looted and the situation remains apocalyptic. What happens next? Where do Gazans go now?
Well, that's a good question for Hamas, which basically has stated repeatedly that they bear no responsibility for the civilians in Gaza and that the responsibility lies on the United Nations. UN agencies are on the ground in Gaza and they have been tracking the humanitarian aid, but the chaotic situation makes even a best case scenario of cooperation very difficult to impossible. Moreover, there have been reports that some of the UN agencies have been involved in wrongdoing. Ambulances have been used by Hamas not to transport the ill to the hospital, but to transport arms from one part of Gaza to another. So given the fact that the United Nations agencies that are supposed to be providing humanitarian relief are at some points cooperating with Hamas against Gaza civilians, it is little wonder that the situation has reached catastrophic proportions.
So you posed that question to Hamas instead. Ms. Sukuman, I also wanted to get your thoughts on this. Amid the dire situation, the UN is preparing to vote on a ceasefire resolution. And of course, this comes soon after that the US had vetoed the calls for ceasefire. Do you think it will pass through this time and will be observed as well?
Well, that really greatly depends on the text of the resolution, but the US is bound to interject if it is substantially similar to the past language which absolves Hamas of any responsibility for October 7th and the events that followed and places the blame on Israel. If that is the text of that resolution, I doubt that it will pass again. If it's something innocuous calling for a ceasefire and humanitarian exchanges without either absolving Hamas or vilifying Israel, US may not intervene. That said, even such a resolution would be useless at this time without a negotiated agreement between the two parties.
Right. There are also reports that Israel used US-supplied white phosphorus in Lebanon attack. And the White House has said that it's extremely concerned regarding these reports. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, Israel denied those reports, but the use of white phosphorus itself is not illegal. It is only illegal if it is used deliberately to target civilians. And no one, including the Washington Post, has alleged that has been in fact the case, that Israel has deliberately targeted civilians in Lebanon, nor would it make any sense for Israel to do so. They have been responding to heavy attacks from Hezbollah from that area, and the attacks from Hezbollah during the course of these past 2 months have been far more significant than any of the past attacks since 2006. So yes, the response would have been heavy-handed, but not illegal or unethical, and there's no evidence of any deliberate targeting of civilians if civilians were in the area that Israel repeatedly told Hezbollah to clear. It is only the fault of Hezbollah for failing to do so.
All right, Ms. Irina Sukuman, thank you so much for joining in and sharing your thoughts on this. This is World DNA. Always a pleasure to have you here with us.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
In other global news, we're also tracking Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's visit to the United States of America. And this comes as he is garnering his support for the U.S. aid.
Well, Zelensky arrived in the U.S. ahead of his last-ditch effort to convince U.S. lawmakers to continue aid for Ukraine as the country fights off Russian invasion.
Well, Zelensky arrived in Washington, D.C. late Monday to meet with top U.S. lawmakers, the head of International Monetary Fund and also U.S. President Joe Biden during his visit.
As Zelensky started his critical visit to Washington, this is his third visit since the war began, and he's there to now shore up security assistance. He met with International Monetary Fund's chief, Kristalina Georgieva, as the fund's executive board approved a $900 million disbursement for Ukraine from its $15.6 billion loan program. The IMF chief met Zelensky for nearly an hour at IMF headquarters in Washington. She also told him that the IMF's executive board was unanimous in its support for Ukraine, apart from one country.
We are thankful to IMF, Kristalina, that I heard now and see it that you will support us financially. It's very important during this challenging period. That's why it means that Ukraine is strong and not alone. Thank you so much.
Well, before meeting IMF chief, Ukrainian president also addressed a U.S. military audience. In the address, Zelensky said he hoped he can still count on the U.S. while also urging Congress not to play into Russian President Vladimir Putin's hands.
Gets the message loud and clear. The whole world
is watching us, observing what destiny other free nation could face to live freely or to be subjugated. Ukrainians haven't given up and won't give up. We know what to do, and you can count on Ukraine, and we hope just as much to be able to count on you.
Now, the statement made by the Ukrainian president comes as he is scheduled to meet US President Joe Biden and top congressional officials today. Now, Zelensky seeks to shore up support for continued US security help for Kiev's fight against Russia's invasion.
Well, many Republican lawmakers have questioned the continued aid to Ukraine. But US President Joe Biden's administration has warned Congress that a failure to renew military assistance to Ukraine could tip the war in Russia's favor, creating national security threats for the West.
Biden's Democratic allies in Congress are trying to win approval of about $50 billion in new security assistance for Ukraine. But lawmakers are scheduled to go into recess for the year by Friday.
And from on this, our correspondent Susan Tarani has sent us this report from New York. Take a listen.
It seems Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is faced with an impossible task to convince lawmakers on Capitol Hill that more aid to Ukraine is needed, notably before Christmas break when Republicans leave Washington. The fate of billions of dollars in assistance to Ukraine remains in limbo, even as Volodymyr Zelensky pleaded on Monday at a university that Ukraine hasn't given up and called on the United States to stand by its side. Zelensky, however, is unlikely to change the dynamics in Washington, with Republicans, even those who support more military aid to Ukraine, would budge from making a deal on border security with the Democrats before agreeing to this aid. It's a complicated moment, even for the White House, as U.S. President Joe Biden wants to provide this aid, but on the other hand, his hands seemed to be tied. And as I mentioned earlier, it's very unlikely that any budget will be approved, whether regarding foreign aid to Ukraine or elsewhere, or even on border security before the end of the year. Susan Tehrani reporting from New York for WION World is One.
All right, viewers, to discuss this further, we're now being joined by Charles Kupchan. Mr. Kupchan is a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations and former special assistant to the president and senior director for European Affairs on the staff of the National Security Council in the Barack Obama administration. Welcome to World DNA, sir.
Good to be with you.
Mr. Kupchan, let's just start right off with this. What are the chances that Zelensky gets funds for the ongoing resistance against Russia?
I think in the end of the day, Congress will approve more funding for Ukraine. But as your correspondent just said, it looks unlikely to happen before the Christmas break. Zelensky is here to try to rally support, to convince Congress, to convince the American public to move forward. But I think right now we don't see a meeting of the minds. Republicans are not yet prepared to move forward and vote on the $60 billion that President Biden has requested for Ukraine.
Right, Mr. Kupchan, you speak of how the Republicans are not ready to move forward with the aid for Ukraine. Now, the U.S. President, Joe Biden, said that he's willing to make major compromises on border policy in order to unlock funding for Ukraine. Do you think that aspect, what Biden has said, will that be able to unlock the divide in the Congress and maybe convince the Republicans?
Well, clearly conversations are ongoing about immigration reform. So far, the Democrats have not yielded to the requests that the Republicans have made. I'm sure that behind the scenes conversations are continuing. But I do think this is part of a broader set of divides between Republicans and Democrats that is in part about partisanship. The Republicans are trying to trip up the president in the lead up to the election. It is in part about wanting to see a clear strategy. So far, Ukraine aid has helped Ukraine defend itself, but the offensive did not go well. And Republicans are asking legitimate questions. What's next? Where's this going? And then finally, I think it is partly about the America First narrative. Republican voters want to see more money spent here at home, less money spent abroad.
Mr. Gupchan, I just want to take, you said that eventually they will agree to continue with the funding, but there is also another meeting which is scheduled to happen now, is allies of Hungarian Prime Minister. They will be meeting Republicans in Washington. Now, at least as far as Mr. Orban is concerned, he's very sure, I mean, it seems that's what reports tell us, that they will be able to convince Republicans to ensure that no further funding is sent to Ukraine. Do you feel that can have an impact here, or do you feel Congress will still continue sending in the aid, even if it's after Christmas?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's happening here is the pause, the debate here in the United States is causing those in Europe who are skeptical of more aid to speak up, and Orban is one of them. If you look at the House and the Senate, a majority of members, Democrats and Republicans alike, favor aid. The question is, can you find the right formula that allows the Republicans to move forward? And I think there is common ground. We just need to find it. So I do think that there will be aid. The question, though, is how much, and I don't think Biden will get everything that he asks for. But clearly the Republicans do not want on their watch a serious failure in Ukraine, a serious Russian advance, with Kyiv saying, we suffered this loss because the Republicans didn't give us what we asked for. So I think there will be aid. It's just going to take some time.
I just want to quickly slip in one more question, Mr. Gupchan. Given the kind of resistance that the Republicans have against sending funds to Ukraine for the ongoing war, what happens if Donald Trump comes to power? Is it a surety that if he comes to power, that's going to be the end of any kind of further assistance being sent to Ukraine from the U.S.?
Well, it's a very important question, because I think in many respects, Vladimir Putin is waiting for the November elections in the United States, thinking that he may get a better deal, that he may get Trump to come in and then say, I'm no longer willing to fund Ukraine. I'm willing to make a bargain with Russia over the head of Ukraine. We don't know. I don't think that Trump would immediately suspend aid to Ukraine. I do think that he would try to strike a deal with Putin, in many respects going around and above the Ukrainians themselves. And as Biden has said, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. I think Trump would change that.
All right, Mr. Gupchan, always a pleasure speaking with you, getting your insights on trending matters. Thank you so much for joining in. This is World DNA, and we'd like to have you back again.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
And now it's time for a quick short break.
Don't go anywhere. Of course, this is World DNA. The second half of the show continues after this short break. On the other side, of course, the tensions between the Philippines and China are going to be discussed. The tensions continue to increase in the South China Sea, and the face-off between the two countries threatens to spill over. We will be bringing you the updates on that.
Also on World DNA, in an unusual move, the U.S. Supreme Court has been asked to directly rule if the former U.S. President Donald Trump has any immunity against the alleged crimes in office. We'll get you all the details on that story. Do stay tuned. You're watching Beyond World is One.
We are
Israel woke up to a barrage of thousands of rockets fired from the Gaza Strip.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
Hostilities have broken out between Israel and Palestine, and the tensions that had been gathering steam over the course of the last several weeks and months.
The siren has gone off. I don't know if you can hear in the background what's going on. I'm going into the shelter now. So it's a very, very serious situation here across Israel. It's a state of emergency.
The United States stands with Israel.
Well, we are starting this broadcast with a developing story from West Asia, where Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant says Hamas has launched a war against the state of Israel.
It's easy to...
Israeli Defense Minister rallies against global calls for a ceasefire, says Israel's operation to wipe out Hamas will take time, but adds that they do not intend on staying in Gaza permanently.
US expresses concerns over reports of Israel using Washington-supplied white phosphorus in Lebanon. Says there is legitimate military use for white phosphorus, but that does not include using them on civilians.
Of the use of white phosphorus. Obviously, there is legitimate military use for white phosphorus.
US Supreme Court says it will consider Special Counsel Jack Smith's request to rule quickly on whether presidential immunity protects former President Trump from prosecution in 2020 election interference case. Epic Games wins major court battle against Google. Jury rules that Google wields illegal monopoly power through the Play Store. Nigeria's Victor Osimhen, crowned African Male Player of the Year for his role in helping Italian side Napoli win the league for first time in 33 years. His compatriot Asisat Oshoala wins the top prize in women's category.
Congratulations,
Asisat Oshoala.
All right. Tensions between the Philippines and China have been escalating. Rehisha gets you all the details. Over to you, Rehisha.
Thanks, Shivan. We have been reporting on the rising tensions in the South China Sea, which is a hotbed of territorial disputes. And it is now witnessing escalating tensions between the Philippines and China. Well, the face-off between the two countries in the South China Sea continues to snowball and threatens to spiral out of control, raising concerns about a potential collision in course. And in the latest dispute, both the US and UK, they both have condemned what the high seas assault against Manila's fisheries vessels over the weekend in the South China Sea. But the paramount question here is, why is the South China Sea so important? We break it down for you in the next few minutes. Well, number one, it is one of the most crucial economic and environmental regions in the world. Here, the South China Sea, surrounded by China, Taiwan, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, Philippines, and Indonesia. Now, this area is extremely important. The South China Sea contains some of the world's most important shipping lanes. And the main route to and from Pacific and Indian Ocean ports is through the Strait of Malacca here and the South China Sea. More than half of the world's fishing vessels are in the South China Sea as well. Apart from this, millions of people, they depend on these waters here for food and livelihoods. Well, large reserves of oil and natural gas, they have been discovered under the floor of the South China Sea here, which is surrounded by various countries. Now, since South China Sea holds such high importance, it has been a conflict-ridden year between China and the Philippines. Let's tell you about the incidents that have occurred between both the countries. Well, on the 10th of December, a Philippines boat and a Chinese Coast Guard ship collided near a contested reef. The Chinese Coast Guard also used water cannon on 3 Philippines vessels in the month of December, 10th of December, the latest incident. And this caused serious engine damage of a disputed shoal in the South China Sea. Not only this, while 3 months ago, that is in the month of September, the Philippines Coast Guard removed a floating barrier installed by China, calling it a decisive action in upholding international law. Well, President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. instructed the Philippines Coast Guard to remove the 980-foot long barrier that we're talking about here at the entrance to the lagoon at Scarborough Shoal. They also accused the Chinese Coast Guard of preventing Filipinos from entering the area and fishing. They restricted their movement in that area. While in the month of August, for the first time, it was recorded that China used water cannon against a Philippine ship, and the ship was resupplying Philippine Marines onto the Sierra Madre area there. The Philippine Foreign Affairs Department called an emergency hotline established during President Marcos' Beijing trip. But after that incident happened, China failed to answer for 6 hours. Well, if we go further back, one of the first swarms recorded this year was in the month of March, wherein China sent a combination of Coast Guard, Navy and militia vessels to surround a site or block and cut off target ships from the area. When over 40 Chinese vessels, they gathered at the Thitu Island in the South China Sea. And finally, in the month of February, China flashed a military-grade laser at a Philippine Coast Guard vessel, which was approaching the second Thomas Shoal, which blinds the crew for a short while. Well, a laser attack is typically seen as hostile because as it can also precede firing on a target. Well, these were the latest incidents of rising tensions between Philippines and China. Shivin, back to you.
Thanks, Reja, for all those updates. We also now take a look at what's happening in the US. In a rare legal move seeking to bypass federal appeals court, Special Counsel Jack Smith has directly asked the US Supreme Court to decide if Donald Trump has immunity against prosecution for alleged crimes that the former president may have committed in office. Responding to Jack Smith's unprecedented request, the US Supreme Court has agreed to consider if Trump is indeed immune to criminal proceedings. Notably, in the 2020 presidential elections interference case, the special counsel is overseeing evoking Nixon's Watergate trial. Smith's move is an attempt to keep the upcoming election subversion trial against Trump on track. Now, the special counsel's team has asked the apex court to review District Judge Tanya Chutkan's ruling against Trump's assumed presidential immunity in this case. In his filing to the Supreme Court on Monday, the special counsel called the request a fundamental question at the heart of American democracy. He added that the Supreme Court's decision would be imperative public importance and that the election subversion trial proceed promptly if Trump's claim of immunity is rejected.
Well, the defense team has argued that due to Trump's Senate acquittal during his impeachment trial, the former president cannot be tried on the same charge twice. On the basis of this, the special counsel has also asked the top court to decide if Trump is protected by double jeopardy. The former president has until the 20th of December to file a response on this.
A spokesperson for Trump has slammed the special counsel for his move, calling the request politically motivated. The representative has accused Smith of attempting a Hail Mary by racing to the Supreme Court to bypass the appellate process. Donald Trump's trial in the 2020 election subversion case is currently scheduled to be held on the 4th of March 2024.
And for more on this, our correspondent Susan Tharani has sent us this report from New York on what is the latest and what do we know about the reason Smith took to take this very rare step. Take a listen.
Late on Monday, the Supreme Court said that it would consider special counsel Jack Smith's request to rule quickly on whether presidential immunity protects former President Donald Trump from prosecution in the 2020 election interference case. Justices are expected to be apolitical. However, with this decision, they are now at the heart of the 2024 presidential campaign. Smith is rushing this case in case Donald Trump becomes president once again and is able to pardon himself. It would be the first time that the High Court is getting involved and ruling on anything regarding the former president, who is also the Republican Party's frontrunner. The special counsel in this extraordinary case bypassed an appeals court. The Trump team calls it politically motivated.
Now, if you look at the election calendar and Trump's calendar of legal issues, it will all come together next year. They will converge in the eyes of the voters. But how is this expected to affect his presidential bid? Susan weighs in on this as well.
Well, until recently, it just seemed that something would happen, an event would unfold, and the former president's popularity would erode. We're seeing really that's not the case. And with the Iowa caucuses coming up and immediately after that, New Hampshire, time is running out, not only for Ron DeSantis, but also Nikki Haley. And then there was talk that perhaps these two Republican contenders may join force, and then that would provide some kind of challenge to former President Donald Trump. However, it's becoming increasingly clear that should Ron DeSantis drop out, his supporters wouldn't go towards Nikki Haley. They would actually go towards former President Donald Trump. So something very dramatic would have to happen where the former president Donald Trump wouldn't be the Republican frontrunner in 2024.
All right, Aisha, let's get everybody some business updates. Next, Bitcoin has once again seized the spotlight, experiencing an almost threefold surge in value throughout 2023.
Yeah, the persisting criticism revolves around its perceived lack of utility. Well, Bitcoin is merely a store of value, while environmentalists vehemently oppose Bitcoin due to its energy-intensive nature.
Now, a new perspective is emerging from economists who believe that the cryptocurrency's substantial market cap could serve a groundbreaking purpose here. Supporting climate initiatives, can Bitcoin potentially go from climate culprit to carbon champion? Well, take a look at this next report to find out more.
Bitcoin is back in the headlines, having nearly tripled in value in 2023. But seasoned investors like Warren Buffett are wary of its use case and its fundamental value. Bitcoin has a bad rep among environmentalists due to its huge carbon footprint. Some estimates suggest Bitcoin's blockchain uses enough energy to power entire nations. But as of today, the asset has a market cap of $1 trillion. That amount is exactly what developing nations need to foster climate initiatives every year. Could this argument be the perfect opportunity for governments around the world to crack down on an asset that they deem as a risk to the centralized financial system? Could Bitcoin potentially go from carbon culprit to climate champ? Well, that may not be a reality soon, but it is something that the governments could have considered pushing for at the COP28 summit that's currently underway in the oil-rich UAE. Bureau Report, WION The World is One.
And in the midst of a global economic slowdown, the Indian stock markets have remained in a state of euphoria.
With Nifty 50 recently shattering the 21,000 point barrier, this meteoric rise from 20,000 to 21,000 unfolded in a mere 61 trading sessions, prompting seasoned market veterans to underscore the impact of the power of compounding on investor wealth. Check this one out.
The Indian stock markets have been in a euphoric state despite a global economic slowdown. The Nifty 50 breached 21,000 points recently. A swift ascent indeed. The benchmark index made the remarkable leap from 20,000 to 21,000 points in a mere 61 sessions, showcasing the agility of the current market landscape. In stark contrast, the index required more than 9 years to progress from 1,000 to 2,000 points. This disparity in timelines vividly illustrates the compounding effect, where returns generate additional returns over time, facilitating the doubling of investments at an accelerated pace. Financial experts consistently advocate for initiating the investment journey at the earliest opportunity. Though initial returns may not be staggering, investments tend to flourish as the market expands. With a rapidly growing market creating a larger base, investor capital undergoes accelerated doubling, a hallmark of the compounding phenomena. Compounding wealth is often hailed as the eighth wonder of the world. While building a sustainable corpus may require years of disciplined investing, the most effective path to generating returns lies in the long-term compounded growth. The Nifty 50 sprint to 21,000 within 61 sessions serves as a resounding validation of the formidable power of compounding. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
All right, let's get you a flavor of what's happening in the world of sport. Next, crisis-stricken Manchester United shift their focus to European football as they host six-time European champions Bayern Munich in their sixth and final Champions League group stage game.
United are three-time European champions but have had a disastrous Champions League campaign so far. And to make matters worse, forward Marcus Rashford and Anthony Martial are doubtful for the clash due to illness. The Red Devils are rock bottom in Group A with 4 points from 5 matches. They not only need to defeat Bayern on Tuesday, but they also need the other Group A match between FC Copenhagen and Galatasaray to end in a stalemate if they are to avoid a demotion to the Europa League for worst A group stage exit.
However, the Red Devils come into the match on the back of a shocking 0-3 home defeat against a lowly Bournemouth in the Premier League. It was their 7th defeat in the league and their 11th of the season across competitions.
What I know is I never think in a negative scenario. I think we think positive. So we know what to do. We have to win to stay in Europe. So it's all about that. So we will prepare the team with that feeling and with that belief that we are able to do it. And I think we have shown in the last weeks when we are on our best, and then we can do it.
Many believe that their struggle on the field because of their struggle off the field, while Ten Hag denied reports of a dressing room unrest last weekend. And midfielder Scott McTominay has backed his manager as the Red Devils gear up for a tricky set of fixtures.
It's the players' responsibility, first and foremost. Players know that as well. We've had many amazing players over the time, and I feel like now we're at a stage where we've got big characters in the dressing room where it's not just a case of like some of the other managers where it's been a little bit toxic at times. The boys are firmly behind the manager, and that's the be all and end all.
Bayern also approached today's match looking to make amends for a chastening defeat, having suffered an astonishing 5-1 loss at Frankfurt on Saturday. The Bavarians conceded 5 goals within the first hour of a Bundesliga game for the first time since 1975.
Now let's take a look at some other stories that are making headlines in the world of sports, beginning first with the African Football Awards.
Nigeria striker Victor Osimhen was crowned the African Men's Player of the Year for helping Napoli win the Serie A title for the first time in 33 years. The 26-year-old beat Egypt's Mohamed Salah and Morocco's Achraf Hakimi to the prestigious award. Osimhen scored 26 times in 32 appearances for Napoli last season, including the goal that sealed the Scudetto in May. Now, Nigeria's Barcelona forward Asisat Oshoala was the Women's African Footballer of the Year for a record 6th time. while Morocco won National Team of the Year in the men's category after their thrilling run to the World Cup semi-finals in Qatar.
The Turkish Football Federation has suspended all leagues after Ankara Gucci's president punched the referee at the end of their Super League match against Resopor Faruk Kokcha entered the field and hit referee Halal Umut Meler when he blew the final whistle after Resopor scored a 97th minute equalizer. A detention order has been issued for Kokcha. 2 people have already been detained as a part of a judicial probe into the incident.
Indian wicketkeeper Rishabh Pant is set to make his return to cricket over a year after suffering a near-fatal accident. The 26-year-old will turn for Delhi Capitals in the upcoming edition of the Indian Premier League. Pant is the captain of the side and could play solely as a batter in the tournament if not cleared to keep. The southpaw is currently undergoing rehabilitation and is expected to regain fitness by the end of February. Pant's last outing came in India's test against Bangladesh between 22nd to 25th December, days before the crash occurred.
And now let's see what's making news in the world of entertainment and showbiz, for which we have with us Alison. Alison, over to you.
Hello, I'm Alison the Grange, coming to you from Durban, South Africa. First up, let's get you the biggest stories from the world of entertainment.
Jeffrey Foskett, a long-time touring member of the Beach Boys who was dubbed as the band's vice principal by its members, has died at 67 following a years-long battle with anaplastic thyroid cancer. Born on February 17, 1956 in California, Foskett fell in love with the Beach Boys as a child and performed their music along with other surf rock classics in local bands throughout the 70s. Brian Wilson, the co-founder of Beach Boys, mourned the loss of the musician. Netflix has renewed the critically acclaimed animated action series Blue Eye Samurai for a second season. Set in Edo period Japan, Blue Eye Samurai by Amber Noizumi and Michael Crean follows Mizu, a mixed-race master of the sword who lives a life in disguise, seeking the deliverance of revenge. Voice cast also includes George Takai, Masayoka, Kari Hiroyuki Tagawa, Brenda Song and Kenneth Branagh. Hollywood heartthrob Zac Efron was honored in Los Angeles with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Efron, who is best known for the High School Musical film series, paid tribute to Friends star Matthew Perry during the ceremony. The two actors worked together in 2009 in the movie 17 Again. Efron's friends Miles Teller and Jeremy Allen White were also present at the ceremony.
Rajinikanth is arguably the first pan-Indian star whose popularity spans across the entire country, from Kashmir to Kanyakumari. As the Taliva star turns 73 today, we get you some lesser-known facts about the legendary Indian actor.
From flipping and rolling glasses several times before putting them on, to rolling cigarettes in air and catching them with his lips. That typical Rajinikanth pizzazz precedes all he does on screen. And his fans love it. But did you know that the actor is not Tamilan? Born into a Marathi